Hello everyone, my name is David Lipkind and I'm joined by Derek. Today we are joined by the Honorable Professor Katy Huff. She was the former head of the Office of Nuclear Energy in the Biden administration. She is also currently an associate professor here at UIUC, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. She is also the director of Advanced Reactor Fuel Cycle Laboratory here on campus, and she currently does research in advanced reactor analysis. Welcome.
Thanks, great to be here.
All right, let's get started then. So our first question to you is, did you go into the government with something you wanted to change or like a goal in mind that you went in with?
At the time, circa 2021, the United States was on a very clear path of reducing the number of reactors in the country through premature closures. And I hoped that by the time I left, there would be more reactors than when I started. And I would be the first assistant secretary in quite a long time for that to be the case, and it ended up happening.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's great.
Our second question for you is, looking back, was there anything that you wish you had done differently, or in the government, or in your career?
I think my career's gone very well. I'm very happy about it. In terms of the government, I think, there were a lot of things that we did that took more time than they maybe could have had I known at the outset, how some of those negotiations were gonna go, right? But with the information that I had at the time, I think we made all the right decisions. I think one thing that, I wish we could all collectively go back and do is think harder about our uranium enrichment supply 20 years ago, so that when Russia invaded Ukraine and put into risk our significant dependency on their enriched uranium supply, we might not have been in the pickle that we found ourselves in. We found that, the dependence of 20% of our enriched uranium coming from Russia was too much, and we didn't have enough enrichment capacity in the United States left to make up that difference. And so we've had to do a lot of investment. It would have been nice had that not been a problem. Now, that's not a change I personally could have made, but I think looking back, our sort of trajectory during that time would have been easier had the whole of the United States been sort of planning for the fuel supply chain a little better.
Okay.
What would you say is it like right now in our current state?
Yeah, we have a significant amount of dollars being dedicated to 3 enrichment facilities that are expanding their capacity in order to enable more secure domestic capacity for enrichment in the United States. And that is on the order of $3 billion that was secured during the Biden administration under the work that we did in my office.
Amazing. That's awesome. Kind of backing off of like the track that we're headed in, do you think the government currently is headed in the right direction, especially in the nuclear field and nuclear energy?
Such a big question, right? And it's very nuanced. If the direction is characterized as an enthusiasm for building out more nuclear power, I absolutely cannot argue with that. My understanding is the current administration would like to quadruple nuclear energy by 2050. I can certainly get behind that. In the Biden administration, we pledged to triple nuclear energy by 2050. In the Biden administration, that was associated with real math behind our goal to get to net zero by 2050. I think quadrupling it is a great aim. It'll take quite a bit more effort in the coming few decades, but I can certainly get behind that. From a nuanced perspective, there are certainly like elements of the strategy that I might do differently, especially in terms of regulation, but maybe we'll get to that.
I see.
So backing off from like the more political side of nuclear, I'd love to hear more about how you joined nuclear and what got you interested in a little bit more of like your undergraduate and your education.
Sure, yeah. So I was born in Texas. I was raised in the country. I was a very rural person. My parents were both engineers. My mother worked for GE. My dad worked for Prairie View A&M University, and then later for Texas A&M University as a sort of research scientist. My mom deployed natural gas turbines, and so I thought energy is a really big, important deal, and I think engineering makes a lot of sense. But I was very interested in physics, and so as a high schooler in Texas, I kind of did a lot of math and whatnot, and I eventually sort of was running out of math to take in my very rural high school. So I went to a magnet school called TAMS, the Texas Academy of Math and Science, where I kind of discovered more of my love for physics. I was technically an undergraduate at that time because TAMS is located at a university, the University of North Texas. I was taking college classes, and so I signed up for a research experience for undergraduates program at RU at Los Alamos, where I really dived into nuclear engineering and nuclear energy in general. I would later go on to get a physics degree at the University of Chicago. And while at that time I was interested in a number of sort of deep physics things, I did keep coming back to nuclear physics, and ultimately decided to go into nuclear engineering as a graduate student. The things that motivated me then were sort of the gee whiz cool factor of things like the Manhattan Project or the incredible energy density of nuclear power, or very, very seriously, the kind of mysteries within the standard model of our sort of particle physics universe. All of these things interested me as an undergraduate. But by the time I was a senior at the University of Chicago, majoring in physics, I had worked at Los Alamos for a while. I'd done some summers at different labs, including one that did granular physics in Chile. And I eventually took a class on the economics of energy systems, a big problems class on power. And I think that really solidified the sort of desire for me to go into nuclear engineering for real.
Oh, that's awesome. Actually, I do kind of want to add on to that.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any moments in your path towards nuclear where you're like, this is not for me, or like, were there any moments where you thought like that you don't want to go towards this track, I would say?
I've never really looked back. I think nuclear energy has always had something in it that has interested me, something that like aligns with my values. I will say there are certainly times when I, found myself moving into a direction, a component of nuclear energy that maybe didn't align so much with my values. So, for example, when I was looking for postdoctoral positions, I applied pretty much everywhere because I wasn't sure what jobs I would get. I got very lucky in the jobs that I did get, but one that I considered was working kind of directly in the weapons program at a weapons lab, which will remain nameless. And I think by the time I was looking for postdoc jobs, my sort of moral compass had started to turn pretty far away from contributing at all to the weapons program. And that's a personal choice that everyone should make. I'm issuing no judgments here. I think the weapons program has a role to play. I don't personally feel like contributing to it in the same way that many people are comfortable contributing directly to the development of nuclear weapons.
I see.
I guess this kind of transitions to my next question, and I know a lot of people mainly don't really know what you do in your research, so would you like to explain a little bit more about it?
Yeah, sure. So my students and I write software that models the physics inside advanced reactor types. This typically involves writing software that captures the behavior of the neutrons, the impact of those neutrons on the temperature in the reactor, and the impact of the temperature of the reactor in terms of its accident tolerance and its behavior in dynamics is sort of question. So we're interested in reactor kinetics and dynamics, so the change over time in the total power of the reactor in the context of molten salt reactors and high temperature gas reactors and sodium cooled fast reactors. All of these kind of, this menagerie of different kinds of reactors is sort of, there's a lot of open ground to model and simulate in very high fidelity those reactors. We also do a sort of broader fuel cycle analysis type of work where we're interested more at the sort of 1,000-foot scale, where we can take a look at the global nuclear fuel cycle and ask questions about how different advanced reactor types will play, for example, inside our fuel supply chain.
I see. Actually, I do want to bounce off that advanced reactors. Well, first, my first question is, what decides what is an advanced reactor? And then out of those advanced reactors that you are working with, which one is your favorite?
Oh my gosh, both excellent questions. So I think you hear people refer to lots of different types of reactors as advanced. This is a little bit challenging because in many ways all reactors are advanced. In some ways, no reactors are particularly advanced. What do I mean by that? So all reactors are advanced in the sense that we really haven't known much about nuclear energy for very long. We know 1932, we discover the neutron. 1938, 39, we discover fission. 1942, we're, building the first fission chain reaction at the University of Chicago. By the time we're in 1945, we've got a whole bomb, right? That is pretty new technology. So in some ways, all reactors are advanced. In some ways, no reactors are advanced. The reactors, like sodium-cooled fast reactors and molten salt reactors and high-temperature gas reactors, we tested all of them, and many of them we tested way back then in the 50s, 60s, 70s, right? They're not new. They're certainly not newer than me or you, right? I'm only 40. They're older than I am. But most people make the following distinction, and I'll leave you with this definition, which is my preference. I think advanced reactors tend to be the kinds of reactors that incorporate non-light water coolant or advanced types of fuels, or both. Those fuels might be liquid salt fuels or tristructural isotropic fuels or, complex metal fuels. And those kind of advanced coolants and fuels drive the categorization as advanced, in contrast to what I would describe as conventional reactors, which make up the majority of our fleet and are sort of light water cooled uranium oxide fueled reactors.
Actually, so on top of advanced reactors, which one, would you think is
my
your favorite?
favorite? A mother does not pick a favorite child. It is very challenging to pick a favorite reactor. I think personally, if I were building a reactor tomorrow, right here on this campus, for example, I would pick precisely the one that has been chosen, by the faculty and students here, which is a prismatic high-temperature gas reactor. High-temperature gas reactors have a number of important and helpful safety characteristics. They're incredibly passively safe, but also what I would sort of describe as inherently safe, which is to say that those tristructural isotropic particles kind of contain fission products in practically any scenario. And that inherent safety, as well as the thermal feedbacks associated with those reactors, mean that they're profoundly safe and low consequence. Not that any other reactors aren't safe, but they really sort of go a step beyond. They have this very high temperature outlet temperature, which is very, very nice. High temperatures on the outlet allow for a number of different applications. And being prismatic rather than pebble fueled is a simpler reactor to build. I do have similar enthusiasm for pebble bed high temperature gas reactors, especially because they get higher fuel utilization. So by having a pebble bed fuel, you actually can reach extremely high burnups compared to a prismatic core. But those reactors are more complex. So if I were personally building them, I would find it a challenge. But I like all reactors. They all have their pros and cons.
Amazing. So I know with the increase of AI and data centers, the need for nuclear energy became more prevalent, and with that, a growing field has been in micro reactors and small modular reactors. What are your ideas and opinions on what is the current technologies and what we can do for micro reactors?
Yeah, I think the concept behind microreactors, where you're talking about, the tens of megawatts, really quite small, is really only applicable for certain applications. I especially think about applications where you're replacing a diesel generator or a very small natural gas turbine, right? Those kinds of applications are a direct one-to-one replacement of a fossil fuel source. I'm all about that. And you're not going to replace those diesel backup generators or, natural gas turbines in a small scale with a gigawatt scale nuclear power plant. The customers aren't the same, the applications aren't the same, the needs aren't the same. And so you can imagine if folks are willing to pay a higher price per kilowatt hour, that these microreactors should be precisely the choice. But that higher price per kilowatt hour is a concern. When you get smaller, you lose certain economies of scale unless you're really able to build those microreactors in a factory and build a different kind of economy of scale than you see with gigawatt scale reactors, right? The economy of scale in a gigawatt scale reactor is that you need one pressure vessel, right? You need a building. You don't have multiples and multiples of things, which can be more costly. And so I'm really enthused about microreactors as soon as we get to a place where people have like sort of microreactor factories that can build, thousands of microreactors over the course of a decade. I'm less enthused about microreactors that might be like a one-shot because the economics just aren't there, so we really need to think about reactors in that space as something that needs to be deployed in the thousands economically. But smaller modular reactors may hit a kind of sweet spot where they're in the hundreds of megawatts, so you do see an increase in the total dollars per kilowatt hour, but it's not so much that you can't even consider it for existing applications. And the capital costs are reduced pretty dramatically, and you also often will get some safety benefits.
So to kind of summarize that, microreactors would be able to use for like remote locations and like more remote areas. So you're saying that it's only like useful or efficient if we actually scale up the production rather than like making like one or two and then just shipping it around. I see.
That's right, because I think otherwise they're cost prohibitive. And, you may be able to exact a premium for those locations that are quite remote or applications that really need super reliable power and can't rely on batteries alone, for example.
I see.
Where do you think the U.S. lies in fully getting to that place of scalability with microreactors right now?
There are a few companies that have significant private funding, and if they take advantage of that and are really serious in the coming, maybe 5 to 10 years, then I think we could see the first U.S. microreactor factory. But time will tell, and we're all watching very closely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then, I guess since we're all about nuclear energy and like with AI being an increase, how do you think the U.S. will begin to implement nuclear energy for our future with AI needing so much energy and demand from it?
Yeah, extra data centers needed for more intensive use of AI and training of AI models and agents is creating a much larger demand for nuclear energy than we have sort of seen pretty much ever before. It is creating demand for all energy, but because many of these companies are global companies and have clean energy promises, whether or not the United States continues to have clean energy goals, other nations continue to be part of the Paris Agreement and other UN accords associated with climate. That means that those companies have made serious promises about net zero and about, their climate commitments. And so this puts extra strain on nuclear energy. Of course, it puts strain on the grid, but I think the benefit to nuclear energy is potentially some of these companies will be willing to bankroll the first few at some level, either with power purchase agreements or with direct investments. Like, for example, Amazon historically invested in X Energy. There are a few other examples of that. Those allow the projects for the first of a kind for some of these reactors to be more bankable, right? Where they can go to the bank and get a really serious loan, or go to the U.S. federal government and get a really serious loan for a lower capital cost and actually build the first few, reducing the risk for the nth of a kind in terms of failure to build or failure to license, right? And so that's the benefit that we can expect. The downside, of course, is that it creates a much higher mountain to climb in terms of our ability to decarbonize, right? The more demand you have, the harder it will be to let any of our sort of unclean energy go from the grid, right? It was going to be a hard enough sell just replacing all the coal plants in the country with nuclear plants.
Yeah.
Now we have to do that and increase the total amount of power by quite a lot.
So talking about recent events, I know NASA has been with like Artemis 2. What are your thoughts on NASA's idea to put like a microreactor on the moon? Like, do you think it's feasible? Or benefits? Like, why is the reason? Like, why are we doing this?
Yeah. So first of all, you do need nuclear power on the moon or Mars if you're going to have sustained human presence there. And the moon especially, because there's a very long lunar night and the sun doesn't shine on the dark parts, and so you have this problem where the ability for other types of energy to continue to sustain the small amount of power necessarily to keep life support systems in order for like a moon base that hold people in it. Like those renewable energy options are insufficient. And NASA has proven this out through a number of studies about sort of what they are going to need, especially for Mars, but also for the moon. The challenge, and is it feasible? Yeah, sure. The USSR put many fission reactors into space on satellites, actually. Not just radiothermal generators, but real fission reactors. We ourselves, the United States, put one such fission reactor into space. It only operated for like 43 days. It had to stop due to a malfunction on the satellite system, not the nuclear system. And I think it's entirely possible. What we're talking about in terms of feasibility, though, has to also include the timeline. And I think some of the timelines that we're hearing are pretty aggressive. So that's the concern that I have, is some of the timelines that we've heard recently have really dramatically accelerated the speed with which NASA had previously been planning on putting something on the moon, like a nuclear reactor. It also increased the total size of the target reactor that is desired for the moon. For a long time, something in the mid to late 2030s on the order of 40 kilowatts was going to be sufficient. Now it looks like 100 kilowatts electric in 2029 is the new goal, which seems, or 2030, and that's, I think, it has the risk of usurping other priorities at NASA, and it runs the risk of failing to meet the deadline, which is reputationally harmful for nuclear energy.
So what are some different design changes that a reactor in space on the moon would be different than a reactor on Earth?
Oh my gosh, such a good question, right? So one problem is that the temperature outside dramatically shifts hundreds of degrees Celsius over the course of the day to night transition. This changes the way that you reject heat. Furthermore, and perhaps more importantly, rejection of heat is complicated by the fact that there is no atmosphere on the moon, very, very thin air on the moon and on Mars. There's a little bit of atmosphere on Mars. Creates a problem. How do you eject heat? Right? You can't eject heat very readily to a vacuum. You need some material to sort of take it away. And so it can be very challenging to reject that heat. And so new, radiative, heat rejection needs to be developed for safety. You also need a pretty closed system, right? Everything is going to have to be pretty self-contained. You can't have, new deliveries of water or anything like that. It's got to be completely closed. Whatever you go up there with, that sort of, especially the secondary side system that converts the nuclear heat into usable electricity, has to be fully closed. And so they're all looking at closed air Brayton cycles or closed Brayton cycle systems for conversion of energy, which is a sort of developing technology. I mean, it exists, but to close up that Brayton cycle is challenging. So there you go.
So yeah, I guess we're more on current topics right now. I guess going back a little into more history on your side, what would you say, who are your biggest role models or engineers who kind of strived you to go towards this path today?
Yeah, I think my biggest role model is definitely the first engineer that I ever met, my mom. She is just an incredible, hardworking mechanical engineer who really showed me what it looked like for a woman to be an engineer. She's serious, but she's funny. I saw her going into work at 4 a.m. because we lived pretty far away from her work, and in shoulder pads with pocket protectors. It was all very 1980s, 1990s. And she was the main provider for our family my whole life. And I think that was a huge thing for me to sort of see her be who she was. But sort of from a historical perspective, folks that you might know that I kind of look up to, Lisa Meitner is one. So she is the woman responsible for the theory of fission. In the late 1930s, she and Otto Hahn were doing experiments, and she had to leave their experimental facility due to World War II and Nazis. She was Jewish. So she was away from the lab, but he was continuing to do experiments, and he didn't understand the results. And so through a series of letters, it's clear that she provided him with the theory of fission. he ended up with the Nobel Prize, and not her, but over time her contribution has very clearly been recognized by other awards and prizes and recognition. She's an incredible thinker, and really didn't let anything stop her. I think other physicists and engineers that I look up to, I mean, I think probably the top one is probably Richard Feynman, right? Who just had a great sense of humor and curiosity about the whole endeavor. You know, the sort of stories about his life, apocryphal or not, I think are really hard to beat. He clearly enjoyed life to the fullest.
I see.
Right. What's the one nuclear misconception, like one really big one that you would really love to like get out of the way and clear up?
Yeah. I think my favorite is the sort of state of the waste, right? Spent nuclear fuel is not, as The Simpsons would lead you to believe, it's not generally a glowing green goo. Usually it's not even a liquid. Most of the time it is a boring ceramic fuel pin inside a clad of metal that just sits quietly on those pads inside concrete casks, doing nothing but decaying and decreasing in danger. So I would like most people in the public to know that it is not a glowing green goo overseen by any paternal figures in The Simpsons.
Yeah. I mean, most definitely, I remember watching Simpsons and seeing all the green goo everywhere, and a lot of people do believe that's what it still is. Actually, I guess on the track of the government again, recently there was the Executive Order 14300, and this, I believe, brought the ALARA regulation. Do you have any opinions on that or thoughts on, recent executive orders that has to do with kind of nuclear energy?
Yeah. I'll start by saying that I actually think that without reducing the standards of safety, advanced reactor companies can build reactors. I actually don't think we have to reduce the standard of safety to do that. And I think some of the tone in that executive order implies that we do. And I think, first of all, that's harmful. Reactors are perfectly safe. We've been meeting and exceeding those safety requirements for decades upon decades. It may be more expensive in some cases to do so, but in many cases, it's neither more expensive nor cheaper, right? In many cases, it makes no difference what your target is. You can simply design for it. And so, with that in mind, I will say that the executive order sort of has a couple of parts. One, it sort of touches on public dose limits. It touches on, which is sort of the threshold beyond which we don't want to see people receive any radiation. The model through which those dose limits are selected to correspond to some level of allowable risk, the linear no threshold model. And finally, as low as reasonably achievable, the operational concept that drives the desire to go below those public dose limits as far as you can ad infinitum. Now, I think right now the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has not changed really any of those things. And they have not issued, guidance that says we're going to remove ALARA. They haven't issued guidance that says we're going to get rid of LNT. They haven't issued guidance saying they're changing the public dose limit. But I'm watching it because I'm concerned about the possibility that the public will hear that the NRC has changed the public dose limit or has changed the way we understand risk or has changed sort of common procedure that continues to uphold nuclear safety culture and is kind of the international standard worldwide, like ALARA, and not understand how that was done without a lot of public input.
Yeah.
So for me, it's mostly about the sort of socialization of any of those decisions. With linear no threshold, I don't think you can change the model without more data. So I would just say that. You need more data if you're going to change that model, and you should prove to the public that that data is sufficient. I have yet to see that data that would suggest any better model beyond linear no threshold. With regard to ALARA, that is a decision about how we handle doses under the limit. And I think that there are rational policy choices to be made that could get rid of ALARA, but I would recommend that instead of replacing it with nothing, we try to replace it with something that categorizes different activities within the available sort of dose under the limit, right? It doesn't make sense for the public a person in the public to experience all the way up to their total dose limit for a medical procedure or something, right? This would be bad. And so my tendency would be to say we should have some way to ensure that certain activities are sort of keeping people well below those limits, even if it's a little bit more finite and clear than the kind of vague, as low as reasonably achievable standard that reasonable people have argued cause extra cost in industry. Not to be too long-winded about it, but I will also say about ALARA the following. By keeping everything as low as reasonably achievable in a plant or a facility, you keep people very far away from that dose limit, which means that it is basically unheard of that we over-irradiate anyone, even workers. Now, what if that goes away? The practice goes away entirely. Now, a lot of workers probably will get quite close to their annual dose limit, right? And since there's a little bit of uncertainty in any action, whether you're walking on the left side or the right side of the room, the detectors that determine how close you are to that radiation source, I do think it does increase the likelihood that there will be headlines. Worker exceeds dose limits at totally normal nuclear reactor for no reason. And so I think there should be a lot of operational buffer between the dose limits and the operations so that we don't have that kind of look, which, you know, I don't need omelet on my face, and neither do the well-functioning nuclear reactors in the country.
As a whole, do you know how the public or even like industry leaders have reacted to the ALARA change, or even like ideas of what they think about it?
Yeah, so DOE released, so I should say, we've been talking about the NRC, which has not changed its rules with regard to this, but the Department of Energy has. The Department of Energy has authority of its own over its own nuclear facilities. It doesn't have to ask NRC how to run its nuclear facilities at the labs, for example. And so it has basically removed ALARA from its procedures already, and it did this a few months ago. And the public reaction, I think, was mostly around this communication issue, where a lot of these documents were shared. The documents that sort of memorialized this were shared with industry before they were shared with the public, and they weren't put on the sort of standard public website where those kinds of documents are meant to go before they were sort of in effect with regard to companies. And this caused a whole kerfuffle, and NPR, Jeff Brumfield wrote an article about it that sort of broke this news, and a lot of people were rightly concerned that things were happening behind closed doors that probably the public should like be informed of before corporate interests. And I think even DOE has acknowledged that this was not handled super well, and to their credit, I would say that people at DOE are smart. They're not making choices, I don't think right now, that are completely unsafe. They are, the vast majority of them, bright nuclear engineers, but they should have handled the communications much better.
Wait, so on top of that, I'm a little intrigued now. So what occurs when the NRC and the DOE have like conflicting rules or regulations, such as what's going on right now? Like what conflicts arise from it?
You are asking an important, nuanced question that I would hope that folks who are senior advisors in the highest levels of our federal government would have asked perhaps a few months ago. Not to be too political about it, but I think it's extremely important that DOE and NRC align on these kinds of changes as much as possible. They don't have to agree completely, but it does create situations, for example, for the DOE authorized reactors that are targeting deployment at INL or other DOE locations. They're going to follow one set of rules, and then, unless NRC follows suit, they will turn around and try to commercialize those reactor designs under a slightly different set of rules. And this actually causes a great deal of inefficiency. And for those of us who want to see more nuclear power, it creates a very obvious potential slowdown. And so I hope that everyone's thinking hard about this in the very near term.
I see. So like you're saying, like regulations that happen at like the national lab level, like their research can't be applied to like the more commercial sector, is what I mean?
The DOE regulations are for DOE sites and DOE projects, and the NRC regulations are for commercial projects. And so if you have looser regulations at DOE and tighter regulations at NRC, then you can imagine you might design a prototype reactor with those DOE regulations in mind, because that's your first deployment, and then have to change that design in order to deploy it commercially under the requirements of NRC. And so historically, DOE and NRC have tried to be in lockstep, which is, I think, wise and efficient.
Right, yeah. That does sound very inefficient, where you are testing, implementing something that go under DOE regulations, but then when you move it to commercial, then there are issues between those two categories, I see. Okay, so I guess looking towards the future, we were talking about more of the past and current. Towards the future, 50 years from now, what do you see the nuclear landscape for the reactors and fuel cycle to look like?
I think there is a real danger in me guessing. I think if you, if you had asked me 10 years ago what the current state would be, I'd say, all of these reactor startups that are popping up, there's not enough of a market for all of them. So surely there will be mergers and acquisitions, and some companies will fail. And we have seen a couple of companies fail, and there have been a couple of acquisitions. The vast majority of it has not consolidated this at all, and there are now more startup companies than there were 10 years ago. So you guys shouldn't listen to me at all with regard to projection. Not even a little. I will say though, I do think that the reality is that we will have more nuclear power on this grid 50 years from now.
That's good.
I think in 2050, we must have more nuclear power on this grid. What do you guys think? How much more?
I don't know. I kind of back my ideas off of what the news says, which isn't a good idea, but I do kind of back off what the statistics do say. I feel by from 50 years from now, I feel nuclear expansion will definitely increase, but again, it just really matters how people's perceptions of nuclear changes over time. And it kind of depends whether all these startups do end up being successful.
Right.
But it looks like from my perspective right now, it definitely does feel like it'll at least I feel triple by 50 years.
I like that.
Yeah. I feel like me personally, I know for sure that we've definitely done more for nuclear than 20 or 10 years ago. So I feel like in the future, I feel like that trend will continue to rise. And especially with the advent of AI, I feel like that can especially boost with the nuclear field and help us get out more nuclear reactors online. So I'm especially hopeful for what we have in the future. So,
This is the kind of optimism that keeps me a faculty member. I'm glad.
this is just a fun question we have. What is one laws of physics that if you would change so that, I don't know, just for fun or even for your research, what would be one laws of physics that you could change?
All right. It's not precisely a law of physics, but nuclear reactors are controllable by human means, largely because there are some neutrons that do not appear immediately from the fission reaction. Some neutrons are slow. They are delayed. They are actually kicked off by some of the fission products that are created. So there's fission, neutrons, energy, all in the first 10 to the negative 14 seconds. And then some of those fission products tool around, hanging on to extra neutrons for another 10, 15 seconds, some of them all the way up to a minute. Because of those delayed neutrons, our neutron balance can be interrupted by a control rod. Without those delayed neutrons and delayed neutron precursors, we would not be able to control reactors. And it would be nice if that number was a little bigger. A minute is pretty quick, and it is our longest lived delayed neutron precursor, bromine 87. And I think that there are plenty of other things that would improve nuclear reactors, like laws of physics controlling heat transfer, for example. But this is the one I would pick because my area of interest is neutron reactor kinetics and dynamics, largely. And a lot of sort of challenging problems of the changes of power in reactors could be limited if you had just a tiny bit more time. Yeah. What would you guys change? Surely you've been asking this question, so you've got a lot of good ideas.
I actually thought about this. It's not more of a laws of physics, but it's more of something you could just change in general was, especially for fusion, because I'm like interested in like fusion energy and stuff and like research. Like one thing I found was like a lot of fusion research is materialistic properties and like materialistic research. So I kind of like wished that there were like an unlimited amount of like elements that just have different properties, and then you would just have like an unlimited source of like different outlets you can go to and like have a combinations of materialistic properties that you can change. And so it doesn't seem so like limited, because I know especially like when you're like choosing your fuel source, a lot of the fuel is lighter elements, and I always thought it was like kind of a shame, like you only have a few elements to pick out of to get your fusion source. So if there's like some magical element that was like add more to the list of elements that you can choose for your field, that would be like kind of cool.
I like that.
Although you guys have more nuclear-based physics approaches, I think for me it would be more of a fun one. I wish there was, well, it's still being researched on, but I wish there was like a particle that we can remove and add on, which is gravity. And so I can either like add it onto me or remove it somehow. So then I can either like feel like I'm on the moon or feel like I'm on the sun with it.
Yeah, rapid control of your gravitational constant.
That's something I thought about that would be cool.
I love that. That's really good.
I guess a little more on your personal side. Do you have any, which research areas are you most excited about currently?
There's a couple. You know, I think computation is a vast landscape of new ideas, right? And so because my work is building software for nuclear reactors, a lot of the sort of innovations in computation can have an effect on my ability to do more awesome stuff. And so one of the things sort of that has characterized the last decade is the transition to GPU processors rather than CPU processors. And so modifying standard nuclear reactor software that we've gotten used to, that we know, that we trust, that we've validated and verified, to work effectively on GPU accelerated hardware is a challenge that not everyone is taking on. Some groups have done this, right? You see the Exascale Computing Project has driven a couple of incredible multi-physics simulations using standard software that was refactored to work well on those machines. But I'd like to see lots more of that, right? A lot of our codes still are sort of meant to be optimally used on CPU-based machines, and I think that's leaving us behind. And it leaves us behind even further if you look into the next 30 years in terms of like quantum computing. What does it mean to leverage and to write software for quantum computers? Like, this is a real question that's being asked now, and I don't think the nuclear energy field is ready, and so I'm really excited about kind of being a part of that.
I see. Do you think you'd be interested in writing that code for quantum computing?
Absolutely. Absolutely, no question. And if I die before doing it, it'll be a great disappointment.
I see. Kind of related. If you had like $1 million or even more than that, where would you put that money into? Like, what? It could be any type of research. Where would you put that money?
I'll say I did get used to thinking about things in terms of billions.
I see.
When I was in DOE. And if I had an extra $1 billion, I do think, this is biased, I think industry is doing fine. I think there are certainly elements of industry that could use $1 billion, but as society, I think per dollar, the biggest impact would be in directly supporting students. Not just in nuclear engineering, but like in a dream world, mostly in STEM and in the trades. So I think if I just had $1 billion, I would devote it all to some of the skilled crafts and trades that are poised to deploy and build our nuclear reactors. And what I mean by that is the building and construction union types who lay concrete and rebar and build your pressure vessel and your containment structure, your metal workers who might oversee welding and everything else, your boiler makers who are concerned with that pressure vessel, right? All of those folks, electricians, welders, boiler makers, all of them are needed to build a nuclear reactor. We do not have enough of them in the United States. They are not valued enough in our society, and they are pivotal, not just for nuclear reactors, but also for the clean energy transition, and there is not enough money from the public sector going into the community colleges and trade schools to train them, especially to make them nuclear reactor grade technicians, right? I want to see nuclear welders and containment structure building workers union people, and you know, I really, really want to see those boiler makers all have nuclear certification for nuclear pressure vessels, because we really need a lot more of that these days. $1 billion would go a long way.
Right.
What would you guys do with $1 billion?
I'm also kind of biased. I would just put in fusion because that's where I want to like go into. And I've always been interested in fusion, and I feel like it's like it might be a little fantastical, but like I'm always hopeful for like what our future, what will look like. So.
Let's see. For me, I mean, it'll have to be fusion also, because it's just like, I feel like when people talk about future of nuclear energy, or just like future of energy in general, they always will bring up like fusion and its capabilities. And I feel that although a lot of companies are investing into fusion right now, I feel like a big missing part is still that extra funding to help maybe more companies try to get into fusion, or to build these like complex mechanisms better. So I believe investing more money into fusion is definitely something we should be looking at, and I hope that it becomes a reality soon.
I think that's the trend, so we're in a good spot.
So when people talk to me, when I talk to people about nuclear energy and how I'm like a nuclear engineering student looking towards getting into that career, a lot of people will sometimes look at me strangely. I had this one moment where my boss actually went to me for one of my jobs. He was like, what about the nuclear waste? And I feel like that is a big response that a lot of my friends have also, who are also nuclear engineering. How would you respond to someone who has that same approach to you talking about nuclear energy?
Yeah, I think, that's definitely the top question. What about the waste? The other question, is it safe? Surely this is like, what about Fukushima? Didn't it like make that whole area hard to live in? Or what about Chernobyl? Like, didn't it kill a bunch of people? You definitely get some of these sort of really headline grabbing concerns about nuclear energy. The waste is an easy one, right? We talked a little bit about sort of how it's not a glowing green goo, it's a ceramic, so I always start there. But then, I also think it's really important to share that in the whole history of having commercial spent nuclear fuel on site at various reactors, there hasn't been any, harm to the public. It's been well regulated without incident. It is a sort of very stable system that we currently have. We do eventually need to find a place for it, but we don't need to find a big place, right? All of the spent nuclear fuel in its packages, including those casks, could fit in a building about the size of a super Walmart, one of those sort of shipping buildings that you see on the highway, which is multiple football fields in size, right? But it is not so big, right? Many such buildings, and it wouldn't have to be for an interim storage facility, much bigger than that. For a final repository, you do need a much larger physical, space, because you're not necessarily ventilating it and things like that. And we will need to find a location to bury that spent fuel. But I think when people really understand the total size of those 60, 70 years of production of nuclear power, the waste that has resulted is so small, and we haven't even started recycling it yet. If one did start recycling it, that volume goes way down. And I think that is another thing that people really kind of need to hear clearly, is the physical size is small. Yes, the danger exists, but I have stood next to and touched spent nuclear fuel casks. There are videos of me about it right here on the YouTube. And I would say that kind of confidence is important to people too.
What is for the people that don't know much about nuclear, what is the best way that if someone's interested in nuclear, where would they go to be more informed?
My favorite suggestion is that they just go straight to a nuclear reactor. And you say, ridiculous, they're not going to let me on site. Ha! It's a lie. You can go and visit many research reactors at universities across the country. There are not now as many as there once were. However, there are research reactors that invite visitors from the public all over the country in about 20 locations at universities, right? Here in Illinois, we don't yet have one. We may have one again soon. We had one in the past, and it got lots of visitors. Tomorrow is our engineering open house, right? We used to walk thousands of members of the public through that research reactor during ELH. It was one of the most popular exhibits. And the same can be said of a lot of the other research reactors in the country. You can look into the spent fuel, or you can look into the pool of where the research reactor is, which does contain spent fuel, but it mostly contains reactor. Sometimes they'll be even pulse it for you, and you can see Cherenkov radiation. And I think just standing next to a reactor, seeing it, and putting something tangible in your mind about what it is critical for someone who's curious about it. And it really is more possible than you might think. You know, requesting a visit of either the visitor center at an existing commercial nuclear power plant, which most plants have like a community day every year, or sometimes you can walk through the simulator. And pretty much every research reactor in the country, of which there are about 20, will invite the public periodically, and you can always request a tour.
I see. Actually, going on about people's opinions on nuclear energy, I had a more of a fun question. If you had 30 seconds for someone who isn't really sure about nuclear energy or has kind of a bad mindset towards it, if you had 30 seconds to give a spiel about why nuclear energy is good, could be our future, what would you say in those 30 seconds, and how would you phrase it?
Let's hit the stopwatch, shall we? I think nuclear energy is really pivotal to get us to a place where we do not destroy the planet. There is no current energy source available that is both clean and fully reliable. You can mix solar, wind, and natural gas to get a reliable grid. You can mix solar, wind, and batteries to get a reliable grid, but only a very small one, because right now, grid capacity is not available in the battery space, right? Battery capacity is limited to well below the grid size. We also have a great need to decarbonize using replacement of fossil fuels, and coal plants can be easily replaced with small modular reactors. Okay, I went a little over.
That was great.
Yeah, that was really good.
I could do.
Yeah, if I had a bad mindset, I would definitely change my mind right there.
Appreciate that.
Do you think the development of current nuclear, like, what is your ideas and opinions about the current development of nuclear reactors in like other countries, in like France or in China?
In 1,000 ways, I am extremely jealous of China.
Yeah.
I think the speed with which their industry has mobilized towards building out more nuclear power is really enviable. The acknowledgement of technical sort of strength in building these kinds of high precision machines as like part of the society in China is pretty enviable. Having a government that's able to, due to the economic structure in China, declare that there's a goal and then go forth with that goal is also really enviable. As a person who used to write policy, or at least drive policy that change, the difference is very important, right? In the United States, the government doesn't decide whether a reactor is built, right? Companies decide whether a reactor is built.
Yeah.
And the government's control is a series of levers that are discouraging or encouraging for various things. So you can discourage carbon emissions and encourage clean energy and discourage variable energy that doesn't, that's like unreliable for the grid. And you can encourage more reliable energy by like tax incentives and, grants and R&D subsidies and like all kinds of stuff like this. But that's all you can do. You cannot, as the government, simply say, I think there should be more reactors in Illinois. This isn't your choice, right? And so I am particularly envious. I think your bigger question is what's happening around the world. So China's building a ton of reactors. France is building some reactors and maintaining their very significant nuclear power fleet. The UK has some reactors being built. They're particularly interested in some small modular reactors there, in addition to gigawatt-scale reactors. You've got countries like Poland that have decided to build reactors for the first time. They'll be building some AP1000s. That's awesome. We also have countries in the global south that have historically not had nuclear power that are very interested in that, like Ghana, for example. And for the very first time, the World Bank is comfortable potentially executing some loans to support those builds. For a long time, the World Bank had a policy of not supporting nuclear builds. as part of their loan program for countries like Ghana who are trying to build out things like energy infrastructure. And so now the sort of opportunity is there, I hope.
I guess for the viewers out there who might be watching this, if they're more interested in nuclear or want to get more involved, what nuclear-based media do you listen to or read, and how can we stay best informed with the current news or something occurring with nuclear? How can we stay informed with that?
Every morning I crack open nucleartownhall.com, which is a news aggregator of all of the headlines associated with nuclear energy, with the, there's opinion pieces right at the top, then you've got nuclear energy related news, and you've got energy related news, including both domestic and global, right? So there's international news headlines in there from all different news sources. I aggregate my own through a RSS service called Feedly, so I watch a lot of blogs. Cheryl Rofer has a great blog, for example. I would just keep an eye on that kind of blogosphere because there's a lot of people who still write a great deal in the nuclear sector. But I think also very importantly, if you just want one news source and not like this whole aggregation system, I would go to ANS Nuclear News Wire, which sort of has little short snippets that kind of captures the news of the day. And you can scroll through it real fast and get pretty much all there is to know about nuclear energy for the day. Yeah. What do you guys look at for nuclear news? I mean, you are the nuclear news now.
Yeah, for me, I receive emails every day from, again, American Nuclear Society. Yeah. They'll give their quick spiel on what's going on. And then I'll be optimistic a lot of times because I see the headlines are either like a company in the United States or a company is investing into nuclear industry, or it'll be something like this country is looking at creating these new nuclear reactors, and that just like it makes me a little happier every day when I open my email and I see a headline like that.
Yeah, I probably use the American Nuclear Society newsletter.
Yeah.
I guess so. At UIUC, I wanted to ask a little bit about your involvement. So, currently, what courses are you a professor for, and do you by chance have a favorite course to teach here?
Sure. I teach a number of courses. I've taught a number of different classes, one-offs, when some other faculty member is busy. I've taught 247, the, Intro to Nuclear Engineering class. I've taught 445, which previously was called 446, which is our sort of nuclear physics class. But my main courses that I always sort of tend to teach, and I'm the main instructor for, are NPRE 412, the nuclear fuel cycle. So, it's technically called Nuclear Power Economics and Fuel Management. It's really about the nuclear fuel cycle. It's for juniors and seniors. It's really fun. We cover everything from mining, milling, conversion, enrichment, fuel fabrication, transmutation, recycling, spent nuclear fuel disposal, non-proliferation. It's great. And I teach 2 graduate courses. I alternate every year. So 412 I teach every year in the spring, and every other year I teach a different graduate course. I teach neutron transport, 555, and I teach reactor kinetics and dynamics, 560. And so I alternate between those 2 graduate courses. I think I like 412 the best. It's a hoot. There's lots of excited undergrads and some graduate students who will attend, and we can usually bring in some of these kind of current events and have a lot of discussion. The other classes are really near and dear to my heart and my research, but they're very mathy and they can get a little sleepier. Yeah.
I see.
So yeah, we both actually took your NPR 100 Introduction to Nuclear
I
course.
also teach that.
we loved it a lot. But I guess we are kind of running in our last few minutes here. I guess just kind of a finisher question. What's a final message you have maybe for some viewers on nuclear energy or the future, just anything you might want to say for our final moments here?
I would just say, be optimistic, but be critical. We try not to fool anyone in science, and I think Feynman maybe said you are the easiest to fool. So don't fool yourself, stay critical, and keep an eye on the things you're the most optimistic about so that you aren't snowed by the hopes too much. Stay optimistic.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Huff, today. It was a great interview. And thank you for watching today's interview.
Thank you.